Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about 5 of the most important things to focus on in your decks in Broken Arrow. Now, to be clear, you don't need to have all 5 of these things in every single deck that you do have, and even if you do have these things in a deck in a match, you're probably not going to use all of them. But it is important that at least 2 or 3 team members are able to provide every single one of these capabilities in a match. If you don't, you're going to suffer for it. You might win, you might lose, but you're going to do much better if your team has these things. I'm going to use the United States here because that's what I play. I haven't really played a lot of Russia so far, but keep in mind that obviously these things do apply to Russia, just in a different way. First off, Recon. This is the number one thing that I see a lot of people, and I've heard from people much higher elo than me, that a lot of people do not play Recon properly. So, in general, people seem to be afraid, oh, I lost some units. How horrible. Well, guess what? It's fine to lose units. It matters to keep track of the score, but it's fine to lose units if you're winning the match. Winning the match is what is important. Your KD ratio, your score is irrelevant if you've lost the match. I know that's probably not something a lot of people will appreciate properly, but I've seen in many games throughout the years on all genres, plenty of people are like, oh, my score is really great. Doesn't matter that we got completely obliterated, but my score, so I obviously contributed. That's not how it works. So with respect to Recon, here's my view on it. Vehicles are not great for Recon. Ground vehicles are not great for Recon because they can be detected more easily, they can be spotted, and they can be destroyed more easily because of that. Don't get me wrong, something like an M7 A2 Fist, or Bro Fist, if you will, can be great for the sake of Recon because it's got Iron Fist active protection, it's got smoke, it's got laser designation, it has a 2400 sight range. But you know what's even better? Scout snipers, for instance. 2000 range only, but they're not going to be seen the same way. And if you bring them with anti-material, they can do some damage. Now, it's obviously ideal to not have them detected, and there's people who will argue, well, you shouldn't bring anti-material rifles in the first place. Personally, my perspective is you don't want your snipers to engage in a shootout, but if they are going to engage in a shootout, you kind of want them to have the best capability of doing so. So these things are important. Snipers in general, like scout snipers, airborne snipers, ranger snipers, green berets, pretty solid. Not the same sight range, but you have a flash weapon. This is not a flamethrower, a firmer barrack weapon. It leaves fire on the ground. It will put buildings on fire, so it will kill infantry and buildings. You go in, you take a shot, you go out. People do badly with regards to microing their units in general. Then, of course, we do have the subject of drones. And let me say this very clearly. Drones are meant to be used. If you're afraid that your drones are getting shot out of the sky, yes, that is a genuine concern, and you should try and deal with their enemy air defenses if that's the situation. But if you're not using drones, then you're doing something very wrong. Now, of course, you don't want them all to get completely destroyed from the sky, so there is a balancing aspect there. But it is important to call in drones, especially with the Russians, I would say, in this respect, because Russian drones work on a different principle. So with the Americans, you can argue that the Sentinel can stay alive, but when you look at the very cheap drones that the Russians do have with, upgraded sensors and all that, an 80-point drone, losing 80 points, 200 points, 300 points is not going to lose you the match. What will lose you the match is because you haven't spotted enemy air defenses and artillery and you're getting blown to pieces. So that is the number one thing that people don't invest a lot of effort in. And would Recon, be a vehicle, infantry, drones, even helicopters, send them on the flanks. Like a lot of people just are tunnel visioned, so they don't focus on the things that matter. Now, of course, something else that would be important to talk about is infantry, but I assume, and generally this is the case because every deck has infantry. So people should have infantry. Whether or not they have good infantry is another discussion, but I made a whole video on the subject of why people are bad with playing with infantry, the way they use them. You should be okay using infantry. Now, it's not necessarily a point on this list, but I just want to stress out. People should use infantry, should not be afraid of losing infantry. You know what's bad in a match? Losing a 400-point tank or a 350-point tank. You know what's not bad in a match? Losing a 100-point infantry over and over again. I've won matches where I was really bad in terms of the KD ratio, but because but I also had the highest capture score, I was putting a lot of pressure, and that's because I'm willing to lose infantry over and over again. Very important to mention this about infantry. Mobility is key. So don't, for the love of God, don't use vehicles to transport infantry to a front line that's not secure. Like, if the route is clear, sure, but drop them off and have them move on foot. Don't send vehicles with infantry on a point. That's something related to vehicles. But the second really big point is helicopters. I do think a lot of people tend to underappreciate them. Now, I understand helicopters can die very quickly, can be a huge waste of points, right? You bring an Osprey loaded with infantry, you lose it, fair enough. But it is tied to that infantry perspective, but really the helicopter point is the second point. Helicopters can allow you mobility of supplies on the map. They're far safer to use than anything else. The only thing that an enemy can do if a helicopter is flying at low altitude is either they have infantry pre-positions with air defense with missiles, or they're bringing their own planes to try and hunt down your helicopters, or they're bringing your own helicopters. So helicopters can work very well from the following perspectives, and a lot of people do misuse them in this. One, they can transport infantry to relatively safe locations or even around the flanks, giving you that information, giving you the ability of harassing someone, right? You look at Blackhawks, you look at Ospreys. There is a vulnerability there. You should be aware of that. But on top of that, helicopters can also give you flank protections. So things like the Kiowa Warrior, the Killer Eggs, they're cheap, right? They're fairly cheap. But you look at the Killer Egg, it's got a 1700 recon range. Not the best, but decent enough that's going to be able to spot a lot of things coming its way. The Kiowa, installed with 4 Stinger missiles, is a great flank protection against an enemy formation trying to just sneak up on you, right? With like dropping helicopters, inching their infantry closer and closer, which, by the way, you should try and do when you can't just launch a frontal assault. Like, I've played many games where people just continuously try to do frontal assaults on a point instead of surrounding an enemy, fighting the flanks, winning on that. So recon capability, transport capability, and then, of course, attack capability. So you look at Guardians, you look at K-52s. But here's the important thing to understand about attack helicopters. They are not an offensive weapon. Not in the way you use other offensive weapons. Because if you're sending helicopters to attack an opponent directly, you're going to lose them. Even if you do sneak them through the flanks and you're just in their back line, you can lose them very quickly. It's worth doing it sometimes, especially because the enemy team might panic that their artillery and air defenses are under threat, but that is a risk. The best way to use attack helicopters as firefighters. So if an enemy has a breakthrough at a particular point, call in a couple of attack helicopters or have them on station. They send in tanks, you bring attack helicopters. They probably, if they don't have their air defenses. And a lot of people, the way they use their air defenses, they're not forward deploying their air defenses. Even air defenses specifically designed to defeat helicopters. They might send in infantries with Stingers and Iglas, but they're not going to send in SHORAD, for instance. And you can deal with Iglas. You might not deal with SHORAD so well, that's a different discussion. But yeah, forward deployment of air defenses is an important thing that a lot of people underutilize and can help helicopters. So your primary role with helicopters, recon, very useful. Like, you look at a Little Bird, for instance. It's a 35-point helicopter that has no weapons, but has a 1700 range. It's used for transporting small groups of infantry. But it's also very useful to stay on station for a very long time and give you that level of detection that you would be lacking. Very vulnerable, but you don't care if you lose 100 of these in a match. It's not going to lose you the match, by the way, on that point alone. So that's how I view using helicopters. That's point number 2. It is tied to infantry, but infantry, it's its own discussion. And number 3, we have to talk about air defenses, because, dear Lord, do people screw up in this respect? So first off, no one air defense is a solution for everything. Like Patriots, for instance, or S-300s, they're there to deal with planes or long-range drones flying at high altitudes. You kind of want to keep them closer to the front line as much as you're willing to risk it, though not in a wood. The reason you want to use Patriots or S-300s closer to the front line is to prevent enemy airdrops to planes or airstrikes and all that. You can defeat them, but you have to understand to micro your air defenses. And a lot of people, by the way, don't. Like, they might keep them way too far back. This also is related to SHORAD. So when you're looking at short-range air defenses, the primary value proposition of SHORAD is to deal with enemy helicopters. They can work against planes. Obviously, you know, you look at Centurion C-Rams, or you look at Vulcans. Basically, they can shoot down enemy missiles and that. So a proper air defense in real life is kind of like a triad. You have your long range, you have your SHORAD, then you have your close-in weapon system, like your last line of defense. That's how your defense. Think of your military or your army in a map kind of being like a carrier. And how do carrier strike groups defend themselves in real life? Well, they have all three of these. They have long-range air defenses, they have short-range air defenses, and then they have close-in weapon systems. You want to protect your lines, you want to protect your artillery, you want to protect your friendly line, you want to focus on that, you should bring all three. Now, you don't necessarily need to do all of these things. Like, you don't need to, I think the one thing everyone needs to do is recon. Whether or not everyone needs to do helicopters and air defense, that's a different discussion. Depends on the team, depends on the deck, depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll do it, sometimes I won't. Depends on what I'm focusing on and what I'm seeing from my teammates or not. And what kind of decks they're bringing. But if you are going to do air defense, so you either have proper air defense or you might as well have none at all. Because you're going to suffer quite a bit. Especially, like, close-in weapon system, you can deal without those, but having both long-range and short-range air defenses is very, very important. For instance, like, if you're looking at airborne infantry, you do have the Slam Ram, which has both short-range and longer-range air defense, so you can deal with both helicopters, drones, and planes. So, not great from an ammo situation, but it does have that kind of level of capability. So that's point 3. Point 4, artillery. And when I say artillery, I'm going to say this as loudly as I can. Most of the time, and I mean this, the vast majority of the time, rocket artillery is useless. And when I say it's useless, I don't mean it can't play a role, I don't mean it can't help you out. But the problem is the way people use it as well. In order to pull off a ballistic missile strike, you need suppression of air defenses, because otherwise they're just going to be shut down, and you've wasted a lot of points and resupply points in order to do that. What about regular ones? Well, a lot of people do use artillery very poorly. Artillery should be doing one of 3 things. 1, it should be shooting. 2, it should be moving after it's shot, immediately after it's shot. If you ever see a player just keeping the artillery in the same position, they're just asking for a cruise missile. And this is not just by the way, in Broken Arrow, it's virtually any game where you can have someone artillery. You move or you die. A lot of people are lazy. So that's an important point. But personally, I think given the cost consideration and the reload time on rocket artillery, I think it's more situational. It should not be your primary artillery option. That's one of the things I think a lot of people do utilize very badly with artillery. What is far more useful with artillery is tube artillery, for the following reasons. 1, it can shoot faster. 2, it can reload faster. 3, it can move faster, generally speaking. So tube artillery can, and it's generally more accurate. I mean, don't get me wrong, a ballistic missile is very accurate, but again, you're not going to be able to pull that off easily. It requires a good coordination of your team, so if you're just playing on your own, good luck with that, is all I'm going to say on the subject. But tube artillery doesn't need that, so you can just pull it off on your own. You do have some guided artillery, so you do have certain artillery that does have laser guidance. Laser guidance can be exceptionally powerful, but that's why recon is so important, because recon, one of the things you should do with recon, I admit it is something of a hassle with regards to guided artillery, but if you can pull off guided artillery with recon that's laser tagging something, you can do a lot of damage to an enemy line on your own. But remember the following principles. Shoot 3, 4, 5 rounds, however many you're safe. Move. Just move. And never stay on your supply points. That's just a big explosion that you're waiting for to happen. And very important as well is artillery smoke. I think I can count on one hand how many games I've seen anyone use smoke in a match. Now, I admit it is annoying. It is spending points on something that's not going to give you a direct combat advantage. But moving vehicles and infantry and anything through protection where they can't be targeted through smoke is such a significant advantage that shouldn't be underestimated. That's how you should use artillery. Tube artillery is the primary artillery you should use. Rocket artillery is kind of secondary, more specialized, very specific situations, and smoke artillery is exceptionally useful to advance on a position with infantry or even vehicles because it gives you that level of protection. And it's available in a lot of different decks, like for a lot of different people. Like the USMC has it, the Armor Brigade has it, the Airborne Infantry has it. Yeah, the Airborne, the only ones who don't have it is Special Forces. So you have no excuse to, at least in some of your lists. Like if you're playing Airborne, you know, maybe you don't want to spend the Brutus points on smoke rounds. Fair enough. I don't, but I also pay attention to what my team has. It's kind of a tricky situation. Like, as I said, these things are important, but you're not going to be able to have all of these things in every situation. You got to balance things out. My personal favorite deck is Airborne Infantry and SOF, so I'm lacking air defense. I'm lacking artillery in some ways. But I do bring out a lot of different things, especially with terms of air power, which is the final point. Like, outside of recon being the most important, there's no particular order to this. But let's talk about air power. First, very, very important, pay your air taxes. The one thing every single deck that this build should have. I don't care how you feel about airstrikes on enemy formation. I don't care how you feel about SEED or air power or airdropped infantry. You need to bring planes to deal with the enemy planes and drones. If you don't, eventually, or many times, you will encounter an enemy team that's just going to walk all over you because you didn't do so. Now, it's best, with regards to planes, to have a combination of munitions. So, for instance, if you're bringing an F-22, it's best to have JATMs and AMRAAMs on it. One of the best planes for air-to-air combat is the F-15EX. It's got a great deal of customization, so you can either bring a lot of missiles on this thing or fewer missiles. That's your personal decision on how you want to customize it. It can either be more, you can either be more expensive or cheaper. That's your decision. But it's very effective. It has a lot of missiles. Again, it's just better to have that combination of missiles, longer range and shorter range, because they'll be able to fire them at the same time. I think that's partly because of overkill. Second thing with air power, very important as well, is going to be with regards to SEED missions. Now, let me explain something about SEED. SEED is not necessarily going to kill a lot of enemy air defense, because any team that has any degree of competency will be able to either move their air defenses or they'll have ways of intercepting our missiles. But just because you haven't killed anything doesn't mean you haven't done anything worthwhile. SEED is not optional. Is critical. The reason it's critical is that things like helicopters, cruise missiles, using your own planes, strike planes, etc., they need SEED operations to function. So ideally, the way you use SEED is you coordinate with your team. I know, in Pugs, that sounds like a miracle. Personally, I just save points, and if I see a friendly team member calling in a strike mission, I'm just going to call in SEED to help them out. You need multiple SEED. You need saturation of enemy air defenses. You need your planes to fly low. And you need multiple missiles. So from a US perspective, there's only two good SEED planes, really. And that's the F-16CJ and the Prowler. Like, you can put them on EX Eagle 2s, but that's a waste of a really good plane. You can use them on F-35As. Kind of questionable, but you do at least have some air-to-air capability on this, because it does have inherently some AMRAAMs. And yes, the F-35A is better than F-16CJ from the perspective of air-to-air capability, but if you want SEED, really, the CJ is the best option, just because it has that large number of missiles. And while it's not going to be as effective in terms of air-to-air combat as the F-35, just not having stealth, still does have some of that capability. Then, on top of that, furthermore, with air power, beyond seed and beyond that, it's transport planes. Plenty of people will argue, oh, using transport planes is just a great way of shooting down, getting a lot of points wasted. It's true, that can happen, and I've seen that happen in more matches that I can count. Never call in a transport plane at the beginning of a match, because you never know how many points the enemy team is willing to spend early on planes to shoot it down. Don't do that. And I say this as someone who uses these transport planes a lot. Don't do that, you'll pay the price. But the level of mobility that a transport plane, especially like something like a C-17, for instance, or on the Russian side, if we're looking at an IL-76MD, it is a very significant level of transport capability that you can use. And it is important to use it. It gives you flexibility in a battle that you otherwise would be lacking. So very important. Again, you don't have to have this in every deck, but a lot of American decks do have it. Like, you look at the American decks, right? Special Forces have it, Airborne has it, as you might expect, the Marine have it. If 3 out of 5 decks have this capability, then that means the developers want you to use it. Though, to be fair, I kind of question in regards to the Marines because they don't actually have much of airborne infantry at all. But all the same, it is a capability that should be used, should not be ignored in any way, shape, or form. Use it, make use of it. It does, most of the time, because people underutilize air defenses, as long as you're not dropping too close, or it depends on the angle you're dropping in. Obviously, it's ideal if you do seed missions before the end, but I can generally get an airborne drop done properly. Well, I'll lose the transport plane, but I'll get my units there. I won't lose the units. It's angles. It's paying attention. Okay, where are the enemy air defenses? Where are they concentrated? How close am I to an enemy? Those kind of things matter. And this is a significant level of capability. Like, I never transport infantry to the front line in vehicles. I have decks that do have infantry in vehicles, like Bradleys and all that. I never do it. I either bring them in helicopters or I bring them in airborne, assuming they have that capability. And I'll do so. But yeah, transport helicopters or planes, both really, are great. And then finally, we have strike planes to talk about. Now, my perspective with regards to bombs, they can do a good amount of damage, but if a team is spread out enough, and they should be if they have any degree of knowledge of the game, if they're not clustering their units, it's going to be difficult to make a bomb run work, especially because you can expect in a bomb run your plane to get shot down, even if you have done seed. So it's a questionable situation. It's great if the enemy blobs up, like, who doesn't like dropping a nuke on 20 units and just blowing them up? That is genuinely fun to do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to lie on that. I've done that plenty of times. But any kind of team that's going to put up a real challenge is not going to let you get away with that. So just keep that aspect in mind. Personally, I'm a much bigger fan, though this is more of a preference thing. You do need strike planes, regardless of what they are. But what I personally prefer to do is cruise missiles. This is why seed is important. Now, you might say, oh, they'll intercept them. Well, you don't have to just use them offensively. You don't have to use them on enemy forces that are far away. But let's say someone's doing a breakthrough on a particular location, you know where their units are going to be on, and they've just taken a point. You call in a B-1B, for instance, or a B-2 loaded with cruise missiles, or a B-52, and you drop them on that position. Maybe not all of them get through, but you can keep the plane alive. Like, this is one of the reasons I really like the B-1B, because it does have the ability of dropping altitude, which the B-2 doesn't. It's also maneuverable faster, so it can actually survive better than the B-2. Like, the B-2 is the kind of plane you bring in if you really want something dropped on a particular target. The B-1B is something you bring if you just want to obliterate something in a location while still losing the plane. Or you want to keep the plane alive while still dropping a lot of cruise missiles. Now, I won't lie, dropping 24 cruise missiles is a very annoying thing to do, but if you can pull it off, then it can be a lot of damage. There's micro involved that can be annoying, but it is a significantly underutilized capability because, ooh, God forbid I might lose the plane. Well, if you've destroyed 5 enemy tanks or done damage to those, it's not necessarily even about killing stuff. It's damaging, disrupting formations, all that. Like, a lot of people focus on killing stuff, keeping stuff alive. It's like, you can achieve a lot while not killing anything. If you've damaged it, if you've caused enemy air defenses to use their missiles, you've achieved something there. Now, ideally, you do get recon, you do have seed, like, that's the unicorn scenario. It can happen. It may not happen, so you gotta make those decisions. But these are the things that I consider the most important. Recon, seed especially is very important, air-to-air is very important, helicopters, very important, artillery, and air defenses. Now again, you're not gonna have all of these in every single deck. But it is important that a team has all of these capabilities. 2-3 people for every single one of these. That's my view on it. Let me know what you guys think. Costin signing.